Hey neighbors, it's Dan Bader, and this is a new podcast that I'm calling Around the Lake. I'm starting this podcast because while the Meadow Mix is great and we have the email listserv available, it's not a long format way to share stories and information about our unique community. While I'm currently a member of the board of directors for the HOA, I'm doing this on my own. It's a skill that I have, and as a former reporter and a current communication professional, I think it has a lot of potential to become a way to get to know our neighbors and to hear about some of the work happening in Prairie Crossing. Watson, my border collie, and I are making our way around the lake right now. Each episode is going to last about as long as it takes to walk around Lake Aldo Leopold. Today is Friday, August 23rd, and it's a warm day, dry and pleasant, with a nice breeze. I never really had an opinion about the month of August until I was in my early 20s. My high school and college summer job was as a campground ranger at a New York State park called Moreau Lake. Late August at the park was a bit of a relief because we saw the trailing off of the heavy camping season. Families were getting back to school, and we rangers, fresh off our busy season, enjoyed the slowdown. One day in late August, the ranger on the shift before me was headed out the door with her lunch pail and stopped to turn her face to the sun. She said that she just loved August for its hot days and cool nights and weeks without the humidity of July. Now, I always think of her at this time of year and that description. It's certainly one of those days now. The prairie knows it's August, too. The grass is starting to droop under the trails and rust at its tips. The compass plants and prairie dock are well past peak, and the goldenrod is rushing in to take their place. I didn't plan it this way, but it's fitting that this first episode is about our little lake. Our guest today is John Schuster, a resident of the chair of the HOA Lake Committee, and a passionate advocate for learning about the lake. He's written about the work of the committee in the Meadow Mix for several issues, and speaks at the board meetings, but I thought we needed to spend some more time with him to hear what he's learned and where the work he and his colleagues are doing is headed. Here's John. Well, John Schuster, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you lived here, and what do you do?
We lived here for 26 years. We raised 3 kids here. They're now grown and married. We moved out from Des Plaines, and one of the reasons we moved out was better air quality. My background is in combustion and emissions, and did a lot of work originally in combustion engine design, and later migrated into sensors and transducers that are used for monitoring those types of things. So I had a lot of background in measurement and testing and looking at different chemical aspects of the atmosphere. And so I'm interested in also now the liquid aspects of the water. And that my interest was kind of piqued by a postcard that I got from the Army Corps of Engineers saying that there was going to be a project out here. So that's when I first found out about it and started getting interested.
Okay, about when was that?
I'm thinking it was in about the 2017, 2018 timeframe is when we first started having a lot of discussions. There was a permit set of drawings and test reports that were used to try to describe what we needed in terms of dredging the lake. There was at that time we had an environmental team that was in place, and before they disbanded, one of the recommendations they had made was to dredge some of the areas that had accumulated some sediment and to try to stabilize some of the shoreline so that sediment wouldn't fall back in again. So that started the program, and they had to file a lot of documents in order to do that. There has to be approval by State Department of Natural Resources, Army Corps of Engineers, the Stormwater Management District of Lake County, the village. And so there was a lot of, there was like a wetland delineation study that they did to study the whole area around the lake and what would drain into it. And they had reports on the depth of the water and the depth and the thickness, what they thought of the sediment. And they had tested some parts of the sediment to see what chemistry was in it to make sure that we weren't taking anything out that might possibly be harmful. And also that gave some guidance on how the sediment would need to be disposed.
So, John, for people that don't maybe just moved here or just might not be aware, tell us about our lake. Just pretend I don't know anything. What is it supposed to be here? Tell me about the lake.
Okay, well, my understanding before we moved here, the development was already, the first phase had already started. My understanding, it was primarily tillable acreage. I think it was I had seen one photograph that it was a satellite photograph that it was actually a cornfield. So is my understanding that it was dug out of a field of acreage of about 20 acres, and they dug it 14 feet deep. There was some discussion of going deeper, but there was a cost associated with that. So they did it 14 feet, 20 acres, and a key part of it is that this is a planned unit development where you need to account for any drainage or runoff that occurs when you build roads, driveways, houses with shingles on the roofs. And so there has to be some percentage of the land has to be arable land that will allow for water absorption and drainage. So I think one of the key initial objectives was to put in place a stormwater management and retention plan. And that was done with the idea that they could use the prairie. And so with a system of swales, which were designed by a civil engineering team, which swales meaning they're like contours of the land that allow for drainage in between the different pods in the prairie or the different lanes of houses. The water would all come down to a logical and thought out location where it accumulates in the lake. And the thinking being that water is not just going to run off the roads and driveways, but it's going to get filtered through the prairies.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. If you live in a cul-de-sac and you have a green space in the middle, that's part of the lake, in a way.
Yes.
And that little culvert that goes under your driveway and the little lowland that's right in front of your house, it's kind of a gutter that feeds right to the lake. It's very all planned out. All the water drains right to that lake for the most part.
And that's one of the aspirations we have, the Lake Committee, in terms of, and what's on our radar screen longer term is to have the civil engineering firm that we've engaged, give an explanation to us of what that plan looks like. To sort of, boil down the engineering drawings to something that's sort of a visual flow that shows residents really how their particular lot or how different aspects of the common areas all feeds into that lake, and then where the lake goes from there.
And the way we use our lake matters when it comes to lake management, right? I mean, I think people think of the activities we do as natural for lakes, but that's not always the case, and we have a multi-use lake here.
Right. That's one of the challenges is that it's, even though its primary function is stormwater retention, it's also used for aesthetics, it's used for boating, light boating, non-motorized boats. It's used for recreational fishing. It's also used as a sanctuary for some endangered species of fish. And one of the most important uses socially and from an entertainment standpoint is it's used as we have a swimming beach. So the swimming and the beach aspect of it is really important to a lot of community members that use that as a focal point for some of their social activity during the summer.
Sure. And I guess the reason we have a lake committee, right? It's not that the lake is unmonitored. Lake County Health Department does monitor it to their capacity, but the reason we have a lake committee is to monitor the health of the lake and to know what we need to do to keep it healthy.
I think the monitoring we kind of backed into that part of it because we were told that, well, in addition to the bacterial monitoring that the county is doing, you need to look at the blue-green algae problem. So, and we were advised to take a look at that. So we did, because other lakes in the county have had a serious problem with that. So that was something that the committee took on as part of it. But really our initial primary focus was how do we take a look at what the state of the lake is and what do we need to do for it? So do we need to go do another phase of dredging, or do we need to be doing something to manage the aquatic plants? Or do we need to be managing the algae or the fish population? And that really it comes down to two components to that. One is that we need to assess what we have. We need to observe, test, and measure. And then we need to get the input of the residents in terms of what their priorities are. Because you can, on the one hand, you can foster the growth of aquatic plants, but the swimmers may not like that. Fishermen may like it, but the swimmers won't. Or you can wipe out the aquatic plants, won't be very good for the fish, but you'll have a nice clear lake area for swimming. So we need to really work on balancing all the multi-uses of the lake.
Sure. And yeah, I guess I was dancing around it a little bit, but the dredging was really, the association has put aside money for that and has spent money on it already. And that was part of the need for a committee some of that knowledge is left. And I guess we needed someone else to step up and learn about it. And we did that through your committee.
Yeah. And one of the things our committee found was that there's really, the history didn't get passed on necessarily. So one of the activities we're doing is we're making a lake book, both in a physical form, which is easy to look at and use as a reference, and also we'll have that electronically so it could be replicated. And that has the previous test reports, it has the engineering drawings, it has water quality reports, it has background information it has a dredging primer that we were given by ILM Environments. It has other things like how do you prevent a fish kill, or what do you worry about to make sure you don't have a fish kill, or how do you deal with algae problems? So we're trying to put all that information into a book, and then that way it'll transcend any individuals on a committee or any individuals on a board, but we'll have something that will get passed on from group to group, and hopefully coming out of that as well, we'll have a lake management plan once we've looked at our measurements and talked to the community about what their objectives are. We can put a plan together, and then that can be something that subsequent groups can march through over the coming years. It's not a 1 year deal. It's a multi-year maintenance plan.
Yeah, there are a couple things you hit on there that I want to maybe expand on a little bit. I think probably foremost on people's minds, and maybe the first time I paid attention to it, or that anybody paid attention to it, was the blue-green algae. What's the acronym? HAB.
Harmful algae bloom.
Harmful and then we may have been close to one or had something happen this year where we spotted blue-green algae, and the Lake County Health Department did tests for it. I guess in June, maybe July.
June, July. Yeah, and then July again. Yes.
What do we know about that now that we didn't know before about blue-green algae and how it affects our lake?
Well, we know we should probably look for it. We may have had it before and not known it, but it probably was not, and certainly this year it was not at a serious enough level that it would cause someone harm, but it was more of an alert, beware that this might create a bloom. And one of the reasons we did act cautiously is because there's been a long lead time between when we get a test, when we take a sample, and when we get a test result. And if the weather moves in the wrong direction, is very warm or sunny, we can potentially have those algae that are sitting there bloom into a toxic, they can generate toxins that could be harmful. So I think we've learned how to monitor, and I think we can be a little bit more systematic in how we do it, and we've learned what the levels are that might be harmful or not. And I think this year, the board and the property managers, they acted with an abundance of caution, which, as we learn about this, we can, you can maybe figure out a little bit better what your margin is for these types of things. So,
okay. And then we'd mentioned, just studying the lake. What are the factors of how lakes are assessed? You'd mentioned terms like bathymetric studies, chemical study. What are we concerned about? What are we watching?
Okay, so the bathymetric study is basically how deep is the water. It'll show you a contour plot of that. And then associated with that would be a sediment measurement of how much sediment is on the bottom. And we have a different way we're going to do that now that we think is going to be a little bit more accurate. But so that's the first thing, just physically, how big is the lake and how deep is it and how much of it's water and how much of it's either sand or muck or whatever. The next thing is, what about the quality of the water? And first of all, there's a simple physical measurement called the Secchi disc, which you can immerse in the water and see how far down it goes before you disappear. And even though the volunteer lake management program for the state's no longer are active. Patrick Auburn from our development in our committee, has been working with the county to try to resurrect some aspects of that. And Patrick's been out taking Secudis readings. So we have seen some decrease in the depth at which we can see down. So it tells you basically how cloudy the water is.
Yeah, and why does that matter? How cloudy?
Well, if it's cloudy, then you have one of two things in it. You either have a lot of particulates like dust, dirt, or whatever, or you've got a lot of microbes or algae or small organisms, whether they're plant or animal. I'm not, biologically knowledgeable enough to tell you, but so it tells you you're now getting stuff in that water. It's not clear anymore. Mm-hmm. So then when that happened, so the next step was Jim Bland, who's an aquatic biologist who founded and managed ILM Environments. He's now retired, but he's been very helpful in mentoring us in this area. He went out and took a sample. So the next step is, once you see it's getting cloudy, go out and take a sample and then look at the specimen and see if you can identify certain bacteria, which were identified as being bacteria that will potentially generate a toxin, which then requires another test, which is a chemical test to see whether or not the toxins are present. Gotcha. So that's kind of the sequence we went through. That's from a biological, just algae standpoint. So that's where we're at now, is we went and put that in place so that if we got through that hot spell, and I think maybe we'll do one more test because the last one was favorable. We didn't find algae. Well, we found algae, but not as many as before, and we didn't find any detectable levels of toxin. So that's maybe the biological aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is the water chemistry. So that really can tell you a lot. So we've had Hay and Associates, which is the engineering and ecological consulting firm that the board has hired. They've been out and they've taken the first set of samples in August here, and they'll do more in September. And this is analogous to what the county did. If you look at the county website, there's a Lake Leopold study. It was done in 2022. So we're trying to follow that same set, or the same sort of suite of measurements that they've done as well. And we'll look at the chemistry of the water, where you look at nitrogen in different forms and phosphorus in different forms. You'll look at the pH to see how acidic the water might be, because that might affect what's happening. And conductivity is something we would look at because it tells you mineral content, because we find we have quite a bit of chloride in that lake. So that's one of the things that we're well above average on, which might be related to the salt on the roads around here.
Yeah, I read that report, and I might be a geek about this, but I actually found it really interesting to just what Lake County had produced anyway. Whoever wrote it just did a great job putting it in terms that at least I could understand. But yeah, it looked like, compared to all the other lakes in the area, or the county-wide average, that Aldo Leopold was in pretty good shape, except for salinity. And then that was, and
well, the other issue is dissolved oxygen. So that's the other really important measurement besides the chemical content. First of all, we'll look at the phosphorus. That's one of the things Patrick is doing with the county. The county isn't able to support a lot of the student resource limitations, but he is getting samples back. He's taking samples and getting data back from the county in phosphorus, because that's the fuel that could be generating biological growth, whether it's algae or plants. So that's an important one. But we're fairly low in terms of that level, so we're checking that. But the dissolved oxygen is an important measurement, and that really needs to be taken in a profile manner. In other words, you start at the top and work down towards the bottom and see how the oxygen profile changes. And you need to do that over time, not only throughout the season, but even during the day, because in the morning it's low, in the afternoon it's high, and that's the plant growth generating oxygen.
And the fish, if we want fish, need the oxygen.
Right, and we're at borderline in terms of 5, I can't remember the exact, I always get the units mixed up. I think it's milligrams per liter. I'm not really sure, but 5 is the number. And we dropped from 5 down to 3, 2, or even below 1 at the bottom. So for fish below 5, you start to see it affect their ability to spawn. And below that, then they start to die. So when the lake contractor comes out and finds it's got a low dissolved oxygen level, they're going to be very hesitant to try to kill off algae or plant growth, because that then is going to reduce the photosynthesis that generates oxygen, and then it's going to that will drop the oxygen content even lower, and then potentially kill off the fish. So by trying to fix the algae problem, they could potentially make the situation worse by generating a fish kill. So we've now taken the position that less is more, and we're just going to live with the situation that we have for now and monitor it and make sure that the health conditions are okay.
Interesting. And does it must vary even across the lake, where it's shallow versus where it's more deep, where that dissolved oxygen is, right?
Well, we don't know, because really what's been done is there's the deepest part of the lake is where the test points have been. So there's been one up near the surface. So there's a test point sampled like maybe 3 feet below the surface and another 3 feet above the bottom. So what we did this time is we took those same sample points because we want to be able to correlate to what Lake County has done. So we're building a history over time. But additionally, we took samples up in the North Bay, which is sort of congested because it necks down and you don't get the flow in and out of there that you do in the rest of the lake. And then we took samples across from the beach at the southeast end. So those are really the primary inlets and outlets of the lake. And so that will answer that kind of question, because we really don't have the data to do that. To make that conclusion at this point.
Interesting. Okay. So we talked about the chemical composition of the water, the depth of the lake at various points, and that would give us an idea of the depth of the sediment too. And then you said you'd take it all in the end and put it into into a presentation that the community could read and then make a decision what we want to do.
Yeah, we've gotten similar feedback to what you said of people who have read that Lake County report, and they actually provide a template that you can use to build a similar report. So we've asked Hay and Associates to use that as a guideline, and part of their contract is to have a meeting with the community and explain what the results are. At which point then we could have a discussion with the community, like what's more important? Is it fishing? Is it swimming? Or do you want both? Or how do we balance that? Or maybe do we need more sand on the beach? Is that all muddy underneath there, under the water by the beach? I don't know. And if we do, then we should think about maybe we put a barrier down there so that we don't have plant growth and then put sand on top of it. Or do we need, if people are really interested in fishing, maybe we need to be restocking, looking at the population of that. Or so we need to have the discussion with the community on what we want to do. Do we want to go out and help stabilize the island? Is that important to people?
Yeah, because that was the next question I had, is where the sediment comes from. If we're kind of a closed system, where if there is sediment and, we decide we would want to dredge it out, where does it come from?
For us, there are two sources, because there's no significant flow in the lake. There's a very long retention time for any water coming in and going out. There are two sources. One is the bank collapsing and falling into the water, and then you have dirt, sort of physical sediment that accumulates. And that was addressed a number of years ago. The environmental team, I think, did a pretty thorough job of stabilizing most of the shoreline where that was a problem. They didn't get out near the island, and I think that was probably logistically more difficult, but that is one area that we might want to stabilize. So that's the first area, is sediment falling in from the side, which is now not much of a problem anymore, because we've stabilized the shoreline. But the second one that's probably bigger for us is organic matter, the plant matter that dies and then accumulates on the bottom. And if you don't have a lot of oxygen, then you don't have the chemical conditions for bacteria to operate on that muck and sediment and decompose it. So that may be... So one of the questions that's hanging in the back of our mind: do we need to be doing some sort of oxygenation or aeration in certain areas, or not? We just don't know. But that's something that's why we want to take the measurements. We want to ask some people that are experts to see if maybe that's a better investment than trying to dredge it out. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. So is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet that maybe we should talk about?
I can't really think off the top of my head. It's been pretty thorough. I think we covered all the measurements that we're trying to do. The bathymetric study, we're going to get that redone because it's been so long since it was 2017 since that was done before. So hopefully the board will approve another bathymetric study with sediment mapping. And this time what we're going to do is, as opposed to probing it with sticks and things, these guys have got a pretty sophisticated sonar system where we can go and scan the bottom, and then the sonar can tell. It can differentiate between the water, the solid liquid interface, and between the soft solid and the hard solid interface. So we should have a nice map this time to be able to look at what's down there. And then given that, we would then know maybe the next step might be to pull up some samples and see if we still have that organic muck that's down there and if that's the right approach that we need to take.
Yeah, okay. Well, John Schuster, thanks so much. And thank you for your work and the work of the people on the committee, the other volunteers. I find it fascinating. I'm glad we have people like you that are really interested in that because, and have that skill set. That's one of the great things about Prairie Crossing is that we have so many, such a depth and range of skill here. But thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, that is the first episode of Around the Lake. I hope you found it as interesting as I do. I've talked to John about the lake in bits and pieces, but never sit down all at once and talk through the work he's been doing. I found it fascinating. The goal is to do something like this every 2 weeks. So if you have an issue or topic that you would like to hear on Around the Lake, I have my own plans, but if you have some suggestions, please let me know. My email address is danielbader01@gmail.com. My last name is spelled Bader. Thanks again to John Schuster, and thanks to you for listening. We will talk to you again in a couple of weeks.